Hey, everybody, welcome to Lust is Boring. Before we get rolling, I want to send a big thank you to all the patrons on Patreon who support this program. We've got a bunch of people there who believe in this mission, want to help us spread it. And so each month they just give various amounts to the show to make it possible to take care of all the video editing, the graphics design. All those guys are kind of the unsung heroes that keep this entire show afloat. And so I just want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys for supporting us on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a patron and getting free access to all kinds of stuff, free resources, free books, free t-shirts, we're getting ready to give a library of more than 50 different exclusive presentations just for the patrons. You just go to patreon.com/Jason Evert. You can donate any amount there that goes monthly to help support this program. And so you can click a link in the show notes there. Also want to thank our sponsor, Hallow. Hallow is the #1 Catholic prayer app. One of the cool things about it is every month they're coming out with brand new stuff. And so they just released, I got the email this morning, like a kind of a summer music list for free on the app of summer devotional music, praise and worship, different stuff that lift your hearts and minds to God. And so if you just go to hallow.com/lustisboring, you can download the app for a month for free, premium access to all the stuff there, all the saint stories, all the gospel reflections, the scriptural rosaries. They've got so much content on this ever-growing app. You're absolutely going to love it. So do not miss getting the Hallow app on your phone. Now, today's topic, unless you've been living under a rock, it has been Gay Pride Month throughout the world. And so a lot of Catholics are wondering, like, what do I do? Like, how do I respond to this? I go to the shopping mall and there's pictures here and there, gay pride this, gay pride that. You know, there's a gay pride parade. My friend wants me to go, getting invited to this gay marriage. What do I do? You know, I care about these people. I love these individuals. What is the Catholic response? I don't want to alienate this person, but I don't want to renounce my Catholic faith. You know, how do you walk that tight line? And so a lot of tough questions to discuss here today. And so coming on the show today, Hudson Byblow is a longtime friend of the ministry and a consultant and advisor to the work we're doing here on Chastity Project. He's written blogs for us, done some amazing videos, been on the podcast before. And so I want to welcome onto the show Hudson, joining us from Canada. So Hudson, thank you for coming on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be back again, Jason. Thank you.
I think you're the only guest we've had on twice on the show so far, other than my wife. And so I love your stuff, Hudson. You know, you have been such a blessing to me on how to tackle these tough issues with compassion and faithfulness to God. So before we dive into these tough questions, maybe tell the listeners a bit about you for those who haven't had the blessing of reading some of your raw and honest and heartfelt blogs that you've gifted to us. Tell the listeners a little bit about your story.
Sure thing. So, born and raised Catholic, but same-sex attractions and transgender inclinations are part of my story. So in my journey of trying to figure out how on earth I could ever belong in this world and everything like that, I ended up finding out that the Catholic Church was the best secret that the world kind of ever kept. I wandered away and everyone was telling me, no, don't go back to the Catholic Church. That's the place that hates you. And there was a few things that didn't add up. And so I did some learning and reading and tons of reading. And I was like, wait a second, this is the place that I should go, because first of all, I know I'm going to encounter Jesus. I had a conversion back when I was encountering Jesus and the beauty of the sacraments here. But also I met people who radiated a peace and a joy that I totally craved. And then as I pursued that, I ended up looking more into the actual church teachings. And I was like, wait a second, this isn't some kind of like imposition of a life sentence to misery to follow church teachings. This is actually a proposal to live a way that is actually, I took a leap of faith to follow the proposals of the church, and I have found more joy and peace and hope than I ever thought I ever would. So like, you know, it's like what the world is telling people about the church and what I experienced in the church is not exactly the same. So I encourage anybody to dig deeper, at least, you know.
Yeah. And for the sake of our listeners, you know, who perhaps maybe don't experience same-sex attractions or transgender inclinations, might not be a part of their story during this month of Gay Pride Month, a lot of them feel like just at a loss of just like, I'm not sure how to react. Like you go to the shopping malls. I was there today. And like literally like every other store has got rainbow this, rainbow that. We are together. We are behind you. And it almost feels like, okay, am I not with them? You know, am I not together? Do I not support them? I guess I don't care about them if I'm not, you know, joining in these certain things. And you see in the news yesterday the Las Vegas now Raiders, there's a defensive end there, Carl Nassib, and he came out as for the first ever active NFL player to come out as gay. And, obviously celebrated throughout social media. You had Demi Lovato just like 4 weeks ago came out as identifying as non-binary with the preferred pronouns of they and them. In the midst of all of these cultural announcements that are typically celebrated of like, hey, we are so behind you and so glad that you are truly, announcing who you truly are. We support you in discovering this deepest truth about your identity, about your personhood. What is the Catholic response in the midst of all of this? Like someone brings it up at the workplace. Oh, did you see this? What do you think about that?
Yeah,
what is the loving but honest Catholic response?
That's an easy question, Jason.
Yeah.
No, that's a great question. And all that stuff that you're describing, and I mean, it's happening all over the world. I guess I want to just first say that the pursuit of trying to make sense of oneself and where we fit into this world, I think, is a good pursuit, right? But we have to remember that we are soaking in a world that is filled with ideas and concepts that will shape our self-concept, will shape our sense of identity, and shape our mindset, mostly without us realizing it, because it's just the pool that we're swimming in as a dog paddle here. And so it's kind of like that the best anyone can do in where they are is just to operate the life that they understand and that they know. But there's always the church, and Jesus is always calling us to continued transformation. And there's always more for us to understand. And that was one of the most beautiful things that happened in my life, coming back to the Catholic faith, is it was proposed to me that there was a little more for us to understand about these topics. Whereas what was going on in the world and the media basically said, no, if you feel this way or whatever, it means this is who you are, right? And so at that point in my life, I just was done with that. I didn't want to take on that mindset. So I said, I want to dig it deeper instead. And what I found out was life-changing, especially because a lot of this came at the suggestion of an LGBTQ activist who said that environment plays a factor in the development of our attraction. So that was a good underlying pulse for me. So we have all this stuff happening in the world here, and I think what I'd like to do is introduce the question for all people in the world to say, well, if we truly want to love and support someone, what are we basing our understanding of love and support on? As Catholics, we are called to love with eternity in mind, perfect eternity being God and our eternal destination, which means like after this life is done. And I feel like that is being missed by a lot of people. And of course, some people would say, oh, well, a loving God would for sure never sentence someone to a life of you could never love who you want to love because this is who you are. So it's really the Christians that need to update their understanding of God. And when I hear that kind of stuff, it's kind of sad in my heart, because I understand when people are speaking like that, it means it's an obvious sign that they don't understand the beauty, truth, and riches of the Catholic faith, or the peace, joy, and hope that someone has experienced from entering into those teachings. So I understand that people want to do what is the right thing, but their understanding is limited based on the types of testimonies and witnesses that they've seen, which makes it all the more important for people to share the stories of those who have found Christ and who've discovered the riches of pursuing a heart of chastity, so they can understand that that's not a life sentence. That's actually like a ticket to freedom. And if people could see those stories, then they'd have to take that into account, and then it might make them think twice about, what does true love look like when I'm trying to love and support someone? Do I want them to go down the only road that I understand it based on what I've been soaking in the world, in the world's words, or is there something else? Maybe some people they use the words like I'm coming out and I'm doing this because they simply don't have the language to describe things in any other different way, because they haven't been exposed to stories that where people can experience an attraction or inclination, but still know and wholeheartedly turn their lives to Jesus and find joy in that. But those witnesses just haven't encountered them yet. So that's what I want to do. I want the world to be able to taste more of those testimonies and those stories, so that people consider a broader picture of the fullness of narratives that are out there when assessing what would a loving response look like. Of course, with eternity in mind.
Now, one of the things that Carl Nassib said in his Instagram story when he announced, that he was coming out, one of the things I kind of like that he said is that, I look forward to the day when announcements like this aren't even necessary. That this isn't such a big deal. And, there's a sense in which there's something good there, and that we want to get to a point where if someone experiences same-sex attractions, it isn't like this horizon shattering revelation that changes the way we look at another person. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that that's who you are. But right now, when we make the announcement, like, I am gay, that is the announcement. A Catholic, I guess, announcement, so to speak, what would that look like? Let's say there's a person who experiences same-sex attractions. Do they need to cower in a closet for the rest of their existence, not letting anybody know that they experience these attractions? Is that the alternative to announcing I am gay? What would be the Catholic way, so to speak? I mean, it kind of sounds weird. What's the Catholic way to come out? If you experience the attractions and nobody knows that you experience them, a lot of people think my goodness, I'm going to get just kicked out of the church and, disowned by my family if I come out. Is there a way to share with those who you love and care about that you experience these attractions without necessarily pinning your identity on that? What would you say to a person in that situation?
Totally, there is. And I've seen it done lots of times. And I guess just to preface this, it's a beautiful and freeing truth to realize is that the church does not want us to hide in shame. That doesn't imply the church wants us to run with pride either. And the other thing is that the church desires for us to engage in a journey of deepening self-honesty. Well, in my case, the journey of deepening self-honesty led to, I can be honest about the existence of these attractions and these inclinations, but that's not where the journey ended, right? It wasn't like, great, I'm going to just settle down here and put an anchor in. Again, because of that invitation from the LGBTQ activist, which changed my life for the better. God provides all sorts of people in our lives, hey? So there is a way. And I see it, especially in cultures where, let's say, there is, localized climates where virtue-focused, the faith is seen through the lens of virtue first and foremost, not just doing Catholic-looking behaviors, right? Because anybody can do a Catholic-looking behavior, even a guy who's doing really bad things. Right? We have had abuse scenarios where someone did a lot of Catholic-looking things, but they had a tremendously bad rap sheet of what they did, and probably more things that were never even found out. And the virtue focus of our faith, I think, is so important because what it does is it points everything towards how it's up to us to strive to grow in the fullness of virtue, which includes chastity. But striving to grow in the fullness of virtue is tantamount to striving to grow in the fullness of holiness and striving to grow in the fullness of Christ. And the great thing about that is that is our choice. And so when people are raised in a culture where that's the norm, they understand that it's up to them to turn to the Lord Jesus Christ, who can fill their hearts in ways that no person ever could. When they understand that it's their choice, then they're more inclined to do that. If, however, they're are let's say raised in a victim class culture, and I can say that because a lot of people are taking on the role of perpetual victim in various states, and it's then it's someone else's fault. It's someone else's fault that I'm where I am, or my life is, or that I'm not accepted, even though the entire world is celebrating somebody who's coming out. You just get that resentment, right? And it's no, until free will, our free will is overridden somehow, it's always up to us. And thus, when the church proposes her teachings, chastity to all people, regardless of attractions, regardless of state in life, regardless of married or single, when the church proposes that also is something that's up to us to choose to receive or to reject. But we can't go and say the church is imposing this on me and the church is rejecting me because they're making me live chastely, which people mix up for celibacy and abstinence, of course. We can't do that because it's us actually choosing to reject the church. So back to the question about how does a Catholic person come out? They first of all they'll pursue truth. In the pursuit of truth, there'll be a distinction between attractions experienced or inclinations experienced and which are unchosen, and how a person ends up choosing to see themselves as a person. And that main distinction has to happen. And that's what brings a lot of people to say, okay, same-sex attractions are part of my story, but that's not who I am. But that conclusion is not possible to be intentionally like it can't shake out unless a person has those previous concepts like locked in pretty good. The fact that a mere experience or an inclination doesn't necessitate a particular type of identity or mindset or self-concept. And so, I mean, I think to stay on topic with the question, we can encourage people to be simply honest with themselves about the attractions they experience, while encouraging people to continue to engage in a pursuit of deepening self-honesty, which will include the idea that we are truly God's beloved children first and foremost, and that it's okay if a particular inclination or attraction is part of our story. That doesn't make us bad people. It doesn't make us like untouchable. Like all these things, the accusations of the world that says the church says you're ruined if this is your case. It's like, no, the church wants us to come home to Jesus Christ, even if those are part of our stories. The people I know who've done this, it's kind of exactly like what you say. They'll tell a few people just to kind of get the spiritual support. They don't feel the need to broadcast it to the world because, well, that would kind of indicate another sort of, let's say, a spiritual shortcoming, like maybe the desire for attention. They don't do that. They just acknowledge it. And they tell a few people, and they have some spiritual support along the way to grow alongside everybody else who's striving to grow in chastity. And then they get on with their life. They literally go and do other things. They engage in the choir. They go and work at their professional job. They whatever they do. They run the campfire program. Whatever they do, they just be a regular human being inside the context of our church because they know they belong there. Because they have the language, they are more likely to fend off the ideology that says you don't belong in this church.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people who come out, so to speak, I mean, motives are different. I mean, you might, as you had mentioned, have people who come out because they're attention seeking. I remember hearing a term that was popularized for a while called trans trender, meaning high school kids announcing they're trans for the sake of getting attention. Sometimes, I mean, I can't judge a person's heart. Sometimes that might be going on. I think with a person like Carl Nassib, he seems like a down-to-earth individual. And my guess is that he's trying, in a sense, to come out as an advocate for those who feel they're too ashamed to come out and saying, hey, look, I'm, successful, NFL athlete, and, you guys aren't alone. If you're experiencing these things, I think there's probably a good heart behind that. He donated $100,000 to a charity that helps, with suicide prevention with LGBTQ at risk youth. Those types of charities, unfortunately, I think they're, endorsing the behavior that sometimes contributes to the sadness, but that's a whole, ball of wax there. But, if someone like him, I would presume the goodness of heart. He's not trying to get attention by doing this Instagram announcement. He's trying to be an advocate for these voices. And I think this is where the church, the void of the church's silence on this makes that voice so much more alluring that he's like, hey, I'm an advocate. I'm here. I'm behind you. Whereas from a church's perspective, we don't have enough apostles that have experienced these attractions and are willing to share how they found joy in their journey. And with your journey, I mean, you've alluded to a couple of times already that this LGBTQ activist challenged you with this idea that environment plays a role in the development of your attractions. And I would imagine as someone, hearing that perhaps the first time, it's grating at first because it almost seems to invalidate this of like, oh, no, that's not really who you are. Something bad happened to you. And that's why you feel these things. And there's almost this anaphylactic reaction within the LGBT community that, that nature versus nurture, it's got to be all nature, can't be any nurture. But it's not really a human approach, in my opinion, because like when I counsel high school kids, I've talked to high school kids about, hey, maybe the choices you're making with your boyfriend as a girl are because, your dad did take off when you were really young. You've never had that masculine affirmation. And then the light bulb goes on. Oh, I now I really see I'm looking for that love I never got from my own dad. And so within heterosexual relationships, it's kind of, there's that safe space to, perhaps understand my relationships in light of my environment. Whereas within the same-sex attraction sphere, it's almost like that's too taboo to look at because there can't be a link. Could you speak to that for a moment?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like you're kind of not allowed to talk about it. Similarly, like if there was an opposite sex relationship with like a 25-year difference, age difference, people would be like, hmm. But like the large age differences like that are much more common in same-sex male relationships, and it's like nobody. And I've seen it. I've seen it. I went to a friend of mine was attending a church, like a a pro pride church, and I went like to hang out with my friend. Really, what I did. So I went. And I kind of curious what they were doing in the church, right? But I noticed that in the church that there was a lot. I was like, what is that? Is this guy's dad or something? But of course, you're not allowed to talk about that when you have guys like like getting tight. And it's like this is like how come that is not allowed to be talked about? That's the question I kind of have there.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, I wanted to bring something up here. You brought about like the kids there's like the popularity once they I hate to say it like that, but like there's all this support, right? I saw a video of a kid he was talking to his I don't know, some professional or something about his experience after he detransitioned. And he said all the support that he got from his classmates and the school and the teachers and the whatever the support staff, all of that stuff was like immediately pulled away, and the kid was like shunned. And I'm like, that's not okay. Like if we're with people while they're journeying, you don't only do that conditionally when they journey in the way that you want, right? And the same goes for us. If we have a loved one who's journeying down ways that we hope they don't, I mean, for us to stonewall them might be something destructive, right? So, but there's of course healthy boundaries. But I just found that striking that the support, which I mean, we're in a society that says, I said the phrase victim class there, and I don't regret saying that. I think a lot of people buy into it, yet at the same time, the whole world is celebrating and shaming those who don't buy in. One I heard, I have several people I know who, when they were in high school, back in the day, would express like a support for traditional marriage, so to speak, meaning like male-female marriage, right? And the whole class is ready to crucify them. This is like years ago and stuff. But I mean, I can only imagine that stuff is going up because the way our society is going, and it just makes me wonder why we persist in the illusion that this is, like that some people aren't getting any support. The people who really aren't getting any support are the ones who are having second thoughts and saying, wow, maybe this was a terrible idea to be on testosterone for a couple of years and da-da-da-da, or maybe this was a terrible idea to come out to everybody in the whole world. Now they have to uncome out. You know what I mean? Like it's who is standing up for these children? Who is standing up for these children? That's really something that it hurts my heart, because it feels like hardly anyone, if anyone at all, is standing up for these children. But on that note, real fast, you know what you said, there's so few people sharing their stories, and that's true. But we can't share our story with every single person who needs it. There's not enough time in the day. We need people who are invested in the beauty and truth of their Catholic faith to overcome the fear of sharing the beautiful witnesses that we have of people who experience same-sex attractions or transgender inclinations and who have found Jesus. We can't do it by ourselves. We need people to say, I'm going to share this on social media or maybe on a private email list. And it's not with a punchy kind of headline. It's something like, look, this is part of the collection of stories. If we truly believe in tolerance, we should be able to tolerate stories like these. Mm-hmm. We need to work together on this, because there's not enough time in the day for that small group of people to reach everybody.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of the people who have experienced same-sex attractions, transgender inclinations growing up, they've felt an abundance of isolation in the sense, maybe there is a gay-straight alliance at their school, but maybe their families rejected them, maybe in other places they feel alienated and isolated. And then when they've got an opportunity for something like a gay pride parade, it's like, oh, finally, I feel like I'm in my zone and I've got nothing but support around me. And then if they invite you as like a Catholic, well, hey, there's a gay pride parade on Saturday downtown, would you want to march, or just stand there and witness this? what is the Catholic response to an invitation to not march necessarily in a gay pride parade, but just attend one? Or if you experience same-sex attractions, can you march in one of those? Because, there was a bishop in Rhode Island recently that has just gotten crucified over sending a tweet out that Catholics should not participate. It's damaging to children. And I remember a couple of years ago on Father's Day, we lived in Denver at the time, and for morning mass on the Sunday of Father's Day, I wanted to go to mass down at the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, one of those beautiful churches. And so we're driving there in the big van, all the kids, and getting real close to the church. And I'm like, oh, wow, there's a lot of traffic going on, a lot of people moving down the streets. And there's a massive gay pride parade right in front of the street, in front of the Basilica. And I can see out the front window, and I see the outfits and the leather and the this and the that. And my kids are like, it's a parade, Dad, can we go in the parade? And I'm like, U-turn, because I didn't even want them to see what I was seeing. It wasn't simply a social advocacy march. I mean, it was debauchery. I mean, it was stuff that I didn't even want to enter into my senses. And we turned around, found some other church, and some people will look like, oh, you are just a hateful person by doing that. But, as someone who has experienced same-sex attractions, gay pride parades, what is the Catholic response?
I think we all have a responsibility to understand what those parades are intended to celebrate. I totally can empathize with the idea of finding belonging and community. In fact, I know that some people who have found community in the LGBT community have actually been able to find some degree of stability, and that was beneficial to their mental health and well-being. I understand that. But what happens when a community, let's pair this with pride symbolism, because I don't think those can be separated. The question is, like, what do these things really mean? Because on the surface, you hear things like, together, welcoming and tolerance, and you know what I mean, like all those good things to do with the humanity like that. But people do forget that, like, for example, the flag, like one of the colors of the flag was initially, it was like, this color represents gay sex. Okay. And like when you use pride symbolism, you're de facto supporting this symbolism, which includes the support of gay sex. Now, of course, some people are like, well, what's wrong with that? Well, that would require a further conversation about what does it mean to love God most profoundly? And you love the author when you respect and honor his artwork. And part of the artwork of humanity is the complementarity of male and female. And the Catechism talks about this in the 2337 about chastity, successful integration of our sexuality, which includes acknowledging and respecting the physiological complementarity between male and female. So you have the celebration of something that's a counter to the virtue of chastity, which is counter to the fullness of virtue and counter to the fullness of holiness and counter to the fullness of Christ. And it's also Catechism 1849 talks about sin being seen as a rejection of truth. And the truth of the authorship of creation, the truth of the complementarity of male and female in the physiological sexual realm, the truth that people are created as males or females. That is part of, that's part of the successful integration. That's part of chastity, and to counter that is to reject truth, which is to also sin. But that brings up a further conversation about what is sin. And quite frankly, people don't want to know what sin is in terms of the church, because they have rejected the teaching authority of the church when it comes to morality. And this is the fun part. It's like, well, how can you say that the church is rejecting you when you're the one rejecting the moral authority of the church? Of course, yeah, there's bad people in the church who've done a lot of dumb things, evil things, but that doesn't undo the teaching authority of the church in terms of morality. Some people think it does.
Yeah.
So about a pride parade, well, what's it going to look like if you're there supporting that? What are people going to get? What are people going to glean from your presence there? They're going to say, wow, this person supports this stuff. I guess I can too. Maybe I can support that. Yeah, especially let's say if you had a role of leadership or influence, right? People are going to be like, oh, well, Jason's there, so of course we can go. Let's go, kids. Yeah. You see the danger there? Mm-hmm. And I'm saying danger. Yeah, danger, because there's things that occur at pride parades that you would not normally subject your children to see. I mean, there's at some times, depending where you are, there's lewd sexual acts, let alone same-sex sexual acts. I mean, I'm not saying this happens up and down all the time, but I mean, things like that do occur. They have occurred. Side street stuff. I've had a friend of mine posted some pictures of some of the residual things that happen outside of the parade. And of course, those got ripped off Facebook pretty fast because it was offensive, even though it was true. It's just like there's a lot more to those parades than meets the eye. Another thing real quick is I remember seeing there was like pornographic cartoon flip books that are being made available like at these events. It's like, why would you do this? Why would you need to? Well, we know why, and I can speak in terms of being a sexual abuse survivor, is that I understand a little bit about grooming. And I'm not saying that people are grooming children for sexual assault or whatever, but I'm saying you're grooming our children for a mindset. And if you expose people to flip books of anal sex with two men, what kind of 5-year-old is they're going to look at that and be like, what is going on? And you know what? They're going to look at it again and look at it again, trying to make sense of the things. Of course, their parents don't know that they picked it up. And it's like, what kind of movement or parade or organization wants this stuff to happen? And so I have a lot of love in my heart for the people who might want to go and try to make sense of themselves, and they're trying to be truthful and honest with themselves. But I'm going to say the puppet masters who are running this show, I want to pray for their conversion a lot. That's what I want to do. I don't want to spend time complaining about it. I just want to pray for their conversion because you're dealing with souls. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think a lot of times kind of the puppet masters that you're speaking about want to portray a gay pride parade as almost an ethical responsibility to support the individual persons, when in reality what they want is a blanket endorsement for an entire lifestyle. And so people are guilted into like, well, if you're not participating, then you don't support these individuals. It's like, well, no, you can support a person and care about a person without necessarily endorsing an entire lifestyle choice. And the gay pride parades conflate the two, and make them one and the same. That if you're supporting the person, you have to support the lifestyle. And therefore, I think the church needs to be able to speak up and say, hey, look, we can love the individual and even provide them with community, with love, because we need to affirm, in a sense, the yearn for their solidarity, that they need to find individuals who can care about them and love them, maybe experiencing the same attractions they are, and find a home. And I think it's the church's job to do that. But, within the church, for a Catholic, like another tough topic, gay marriage. Like, let's say your sister, your cousin, your coworker, whatever, is saying, hey, I'm getting married in 3 months to my partner. I'd love for you to be there. Would you attend our gay wedding? And so you care about this person. You love this individual. What do you do here? Because I don't want to burn a bridge, and I don't want to be all Mr. Pious, high and mighty. I'm so much better than you. But I feel like if I'm going, I'm endorsed. Like, what do I do? Hudson, please help. Should a Catholic attend a gay wedding?
Jason, I have had family members, not my family members, but families, members of people in the weddings reach out to me with that question. And outside of having like a preemptive conversation saying, look, I anticipate that you and your partner are going to go the distance. If you decide to do a wedding, I really request that you don't even send an invitation to me, because that even though I love you to pieces, and I think your partner is a decent guy, like, we could go and have a beer maybe, I can't support the marriage. And you know that about me, because you know that I'm striving to be faithful, and you know that I'm striving to love you with eternity in mind. And I just sincerely ask that you can respect that. So there's the preemptive conversation like that. And you see where that goes. But outside of that, it's most of the times when I hear about this, it gets really messy. And sometimes it reverts to things like emotional manipulative tactics. For example, well, if you say no, then you clearly hate me, you don't love me, blah, 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 blah. All this stuff that no one would put up with in like an opposite sex relationship. Nobody in the right mind would say this is a healthy situation. So, but for whatever reason, family members who are simply trying to love God and set an example for their children about what they can and cannot support, they're being raked through the cold. I would say it's somewhat of like a mini crucifixion. for some. And I've seen the transcripts of some of the text conversations and emails. Jason, like if you want to talk about pain, the crucifixion of the families who they don't just get rejected by like they say, I want to. Will you tolerate my Catholic belief? And the answer is no. But they don't just get rejected by the person who's saying, come to my gay wedding, so to speak. They're getting rejected by all of their family members who've gone on side with it. So like a lone lighthouse standing in the middle of the night. That's all. They're on their own. And there is a special suffering there that I hope that people can find a purpose for through, like, a penitential offering or something. But that's not okay. And so it really boils down to the idea that it's like, well, if tolerance is really a thing, even though it's hard, we hope that people will tolerate someone saying, I love you, but I can't attend this wedding. I can't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you said at the start there. But what's needed first is a conversation, right? A time, maybe go to have coffee, go sit down at a lunch, and not only say, this is really hard, for me, that you're sharing your heart with them, that how painful this decision is because of how much you value their friendship and their relationship, but not just to kind of pour out your reasons. Like, I'm not doing this because I don't like you or this person. It's because I have this belief of what marriage is, as a sacrament. And, you don't need to say necessarily the same words, but that this would be, in a sense, a sacrilege. I mean, I don't think that'd be helpful to use that phraseology in that conversation, but to kind of put out your heart there in a sincere way, explain to them why this is so difficult, and then listen to them and say, how is this resounding with you? Because I'm sure this is hard for you. Make sure that you're taking, I think, a moment to kind of listen to how this is landing in them, but then maybe kind of turn the tables a bit of saying, like, I hope that you don't reject me because of my beliefs. I hope that our relationship can still be sustained, even though we don't necessarily see eye to eye on what a marriage is. And, maybe it can't be sustained. Maybe this could cost you the relationship, but I think love is willing, and this sounds weird, but like sometimes love is willing to let go of somebody. If they're going to reject you over them, are you willing to love them enough? It's almost like if you have a bad friend who's, maybe struggling with a different thing, and you are forthright with them about, hey, I think this is really harmful for you, and I think you should talk to your parents about this or that, and they cut you off for any number of reasons. You love them enough to risk sharing the truth with them. It's not a lack of love. It's because you love them so much. And Jesus said, hey, I didn't come to bring peace, but the sword. That those enemies will be within their own household. And I think if you're willing to stand up for what is true out of love, as Hudson said, you could get crucified. I mean, today we're celebrating the feast of St. John Fisher as we're recording this, St. Thomas More. Like St. John Fisher, stood up to King Henry VIII, partly because of his relationship with Catherine of Aragon, the validity of that marriage. And what ended up happening to John Fisher, lopped his head off, I think with an axe, and then impaled his head on a spike, on a pole, and hung it off, the London Bridge for like weeks for people to see. And that was the price he was willing to pay for honesty. And so to lovingly explain to somebody that you cannot attend this because it's not what you believe what marriage is, and you hope you can still have a relationship with this person and that they won't reject you because of them. But I think in the end, being willing to face that rejection, as a Catholic, we see that as authentic love.
Totally. And nowhere in our Catholic faith does it say that our life will just simply be without suffering. Right? We follow a crucified Christ. We should expect the same. Not that we should seek it out, but sometimes we get thrown into those situations. Mm-hmm. And I gotta bring up this thing too. Like what happens when that person, they enter that type of relationship and a marriage and stuff like that, and then they wake up with Jesus. So it sounds like I was trying to say, if they have an awakening with Jesus, and like so many people have, like a massively increasing amount of people have had, and they said, wait a second. Like, this isn't who I am, and the world just affirmed me. This is not who I am, and I'm God is calling me out of this relationship. Like, how are they going to look at you when they say, well, wait a second, you just patted me on the back and just said, just do whatever feels right? How can someone even respect someone like that? A real friend is going to try to do what was going to be in your best interest. And if you are convicted of a truth that actually would have eternal consequences, such as the entrance to heaven, the potential entrance to heaven, we shouldn't be fearful. We have to be like careful and appropriate, but we don't need to be fearful of how someone might respond, such as long as we're offering it in the most loving way that we know how. We know that some people are going to simply reject what we have to offer. That's if we go in with that expectation, and then when it happens, it's going to be less of a damaging, like less of a shock, I guess. But all that does is point us to the reality of identifying healthy boundaries, because it's not that you push someone out of your life or they push you out. Well, maybe the physical side, in this corporeal realm, they're pushed away. But who do we take all of our petitions to? We take our petitions to the foot of the cross, to Mary, to Jesus through Mary, or just straight to Jesus, of course. And then Jesus can pour out his love to those people that we still love who have pushed us away. Yeah. And there's a huge piece in that. It's like, I don't have to be the person to chase someone down to make them finally like me again. I really don't. Like instead I can just stand for the truth in a loving and appropriate way, know that not everyone's going to appreciate it.
Yeah.
Maybe the ones that find Jesus eventually will say, you know what, 8 years ago, you were the only person who had the guts to gently inform me that I had concerns, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I think
conversations that are starting to happen now that we're further and further down this road. Another thing real quick, because some people are going to go and say like, well, how can you not go to that marriage, but you can go to that other marriage, which is shot from the beginning because these two people are basket cases and, an opposite sex marriage. I get that question all the time. And the answer is quite simply this, is that from the onset of the relationship, only one of those marriages or one of those relational configurations has the potential to reflect the successful integration of the human being, the sexual union of male and female. So one of them is ordered in accordance with what God has authored into creation, and the other's not, right from the beginning. Yeah. So even though there is a disastrous opposite-sex marriage, there is the potential that marriage could be redeemed into something that reflects the fullness of virtue, which includes chastity. Yeah. A same-sex relationship, which may have stability and may have examples of loving behavior and whatever, at the end of the day, it's still counter to chastity, because it's a countering of successful integration of our sexuality in terms of the physiological realities written into creation. And thus, even though those people might be lovely people, we have to accept, or the church proposes that we accept. This is the thing. The church proposes that we accept that to be a countering of the virtue of chastity. And so really it comes down to, again, do we accept the teaching authority of the church, or do we just say, well, they're just awesome people and I want them to be happy, right? Now, if we truly want people to be happy, we'll do things that'll help point them towards heaven, that, which involves growing in the fullness of virtue, not just doing Catholic-looking things, growing in the fullness of virtue. Well, our whole life pouring out ways to help people encounter that reality.
Yeah, no, I think that's a super important point of just that there's more ways to love an individual than to attend a ceremony. Speaking the truth in love is an expression of love. But it's like, I think as the book of Proverbs says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. I don't know if that's from Sirach or Proverbs, but you think, well, wait a minute, faithful are the wounds of a friend. I mean, that sounds sadistic and, morbid, but it's like, oh, if someone puts a knife in you, are they your friend? Well, it depends. Like, is it a surgeon or a robber? If it's a mugger, then no, putting a knife in me is not a friendly thing. But if it's a surgeon who's applying that scalpel with precision and love for a healing effect, then it could be an expression of love, even if it doesn't feel that great. And so obviously a tough subject, but we just got to remember attending a ceremony isn't the only way to love another human being. Sometimes it's a lack of love in attending one of those because we don't love them enough to speak the truth. Now, for someone on the opposite end, a question I could pose to you is, well, isn't the church kind of just being unfair though? So like, opposite sex couples can have love, but same sex couples can't have love. Isn't the church being unfair? Because it's like imposing chastity upon all these people, like forcing, this burden of celibacy and chastity and abstinence upon these people. Like, isn't that an imposition? Isn't that unfair? Isn't that a violation of their human rights? How would you respond to that as someone who sees this as like big bad church imposing these laws that just aren't fair?
Honestly, man, if I had like an army of 1 million people who had 5 seconds to have conversations, it would be to undo the lie that chastity is an imposition, which requires an understanding of chastity through the lens of the church, which implies that we understand it not to be celibacy or abstinence. I can impose abstinence by separating people, right? But I can't impose chastity because I don't have the power to overwrite someone's free will, and that's the thing. So the bigger question is, what is love anyway? Love is love. You should be able to love who you want to love. How could the big bad church prevent me from loving who I want to love? Believe me, this is believed by so many people. And it seems to come to a version of love that is simply too small, that doesn't have eternity in mind, with as much of a broadened sense of understanding that it otherwise could. It's missing an understanding of the language of the church. People reject chastity without having a clue what it means, and I find that kind of humorous. It's like how no other context in the universe is something like that just accepted, right? Yeah. So we have to bring people to that deepening understanding of chastity in and of itself. Real quick again, because it's so important. It's distinct from abstinence and celibacy. Abstinence can be imposed. Celibacy is a state in life. Abstinence is about behavior. Chastity is about the heart. This is just distinctions, right? Because books can be written about those things. There's such a thing as unchaste celibacy, and there's such a thing as celibate chastity. Can you imagine what the chaos if people just use those terms interchangeably like they do? Anyway.
Yeah, and so just a quick primer for the listeners. Abstinence is the absence of sex. Celibacy is the state of not being married. And then chastity is this fuller notion that not only integrates your heart, your soul, your mind, your imagination, but it's the presence of a virtue of purity as opposed to the absence of mere intercourse or marriage. So just want to throw out those distinctions because, like you said, these are loaded terms, and if we don't know what they mean, it's chaos.
Absolutely. And just to go on you said the word purity. Let's say someone had a past where they did some things. They can begin their pursuit of chastity right now. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what has happened in the past, because it's a virtue that we can choose in our heart. We start again with that victorious journey towards honoring what God has authored. We start that the moment we want, and nothing's stopping us from that except for ourselves. So even if someone's past is less than pure, big deal. Start practicing chastity today and see what happens. Yeah. So again, different from abstinence and celibacy. I'm just looking at a note here. It's proposed because it's something that we have to decide. The church proposes. Although it seems like the whole world perceives our proposal of chastity as an imposition. This, by the way, especially with all these laws that are coming down the road that are setting up the stage to make it illegal to impose the Catholic sexual ethic. I'm not going to get into too much detail there. One nuance that needs to be like accented all the time when we're talking. We're going to transform the cultural climates of many churches if we do this, is to talk about chastity through the lens of being a proposal. The proposal to strive for chastity. The proposal. Not just say be chaste. We have to introduce proposal to help people become versed in the language to understand that the accusations of it being an imposition are ridiculous. It's true that it can be proposed recklessly. That's true. But at the end of the day, right here in the heart, right there. Mm-hmm. And of course, the last thing is that chastity is proposed to all people, as we know, regardless of state in life, married or single, and regardless of age, and regardless of whatever attractions and inclinations they experience. The other great thing about chastity is because you're pursuing growing in the fullness. If you're pursuing chastity, you're pursuing growing in virtue, hopefully growing in the fullness of virtue, the fullness of holiness, and the fullness of Christ. It will be transformative. And so when people say, well, it's cruel, the church isn't letting me love who I want to love, it's like, well, why don't you try loving through the lens of offering your heart to the Lord, offering your sexuality to the Lord? Have you ever thought of that before? I mean, this is the whole thing. Like, if we give a gift that matters, we will experience a great degree of joy in giving that gift. And our sexuality is an amazing gift, so from God. So if we give that gift of our sexuality to God, we should experience a tremendous amount of joy. It took me a leap of faith to jump there and to do it, and I did, and I've never looked back. Even though I haven't been perfectly chaste, like I had backslidden along my way, right? Because I'm not a saint, but I'm striving for chastity all the time. And if we have that as the foundation, then we understand that a transformation can occur. If we don't believe that, and so hang on, God will transform our heart and what we ultimately desire, which will be towards heaven. Some people will jump on this and say, aha, you're talking about changing attractions. It's like, actually, I'm not. The pursuit of chastity can bring about a transformation of heart where people desire the Lord and they desire holiness more. Well, what is holy? Well, there comes holy boundaries and holy friendships and holy relationships and holy romantic interest. That means interest with people who are also striving to grow in the fullness of virtue, also striving to grow in chastity. And when you have a few people who are looking for that in mind, there is an emergence from the stifling idea that says because same-sex attraction is your part of your story today, that means that that's all you'll ever experience. There's an emergence out of that stifling idea that says just because transgender inclinations are part of your story today, that means that you're forever trans. Like, those ideas begin to melt away, not because someone's praying them away, but because they're actually having their heart transformed by the Lord. And I see this over and over again. And the Lord could take 10 years to do this, or he can do it in a snap. We have tons of stories online, especially among the detransitioners out there, many wonderful stories of non-Catholic Christians too, who the Lord basically met in the moment and said, like, you belong to me. You belong to me. Imagine meeting Jesus and him saying that, right? How could you go back? Like,
Yeah.
These are the stories that we need to get in front of people, right? So that people understand that, like, Jesus is not just he's not like a way out.
Yeah.
So to speak. He's the way to wholeness, the way to the greatest degree of joy people ever encountered. It's funny that people, they find Jesus and like, it's that amount of people who are finding Jesus after a life of LGBTQ. I'm not going to say the lifestyle, because the lifestyle could look at anything depending on what that person perceived would be fulfilling. Could be look like anything, but that amount of people is like exploding right now. In like, explosive in numbers is what I mean, right? There's growing because the Lord is showering graces upon them, and they're like I love the people that I used to know in that community, and they might even have a special affection in their heart for their person who used to be their partner, but they know that once they've tasted the love of Jesus and tasted the pursuit of chastity, for those who have the language to understand the pursuit of chastity, they're just not going back. And it's the same with me. It's like, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to the box. Forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a total paradigm shift. It's not the church is telling same-sex attracted individuals that they can't love. The Catholic Church then would be pretty much the only institution that's actually encouraging them to love. It's pretty much the only institution left saying, no, what we want more than anything is for you guys to love one another. But that's the world's notion of love is obviously different than the church's. And so much could be spoken there. Now, you had mentioned in terms of, conversion therapy and things like that, and trying to change people and legislation and banning chastity. I know, you're up in Canada. You guys are a few years ahead of us in terms of legislatively what's going on with that stuff. But, when it comes to conversion therapy, is that what the church is asking to be imposed on individuals? What does that term mean? Is it getting stretched, so broadly that it'll encompass absolutely everything? Could you provide some clarification? What direction we're heading in there legislatively, what to look out for? And is that what the real church is really saying, that, hey, if you experience same-sex attractions, you should be forced into therapy, and that way your attractions will get changed, and then you can be really holy? Untangle this whole thing for us if you can before we wrap up.
Sure. So I'm not a lawyer, okay? So but I have had the pleasure of being in on a number of meetings with like city councils and even like college groups with the universities. They have sessions on this and that. This is just for the record, this is independently driven. This is not to do with nothing to do with my employment or anything like that. I found these things. I'm like, I want to step into these sessions and check things out and see what they're saying about this stuff, from a legal standpoint. And for one thing, the first thing, I guess, it's important for us to know that the church isn't trying to get anybody to seek out to change their attractions or inclinations. That's why the Catholic Church does not endorse therapies that set out to change a person's, change a person from gay to straight, or the church doesn't go there. Like, it's just like, look, self-determination, like my body, my choice. The church is like, well, you should have the right to self-determination to talk to who you want to talk to about what sort of things you're going through. That is seeming to be coming to an end after the conversion therapy laws go through. Now, if you call something a conversion therapy law, now people are going to think about like these like electroshock crazy therapies, which unfortunately were done and they've harmed lots of people. I know there's a lady who's very close to my heart. She's like 20 years older than me, so she went through those things, horrible experiences, and that my heart breaks for anyone who's ever had to have been pushed into those. But thankfully, our church doesn't endorse that anyway. But I understand why the public goes bonkers when they hear like, "Oh, you oppose conversion therapy? You're a monster," basically. What they don't look at is the actual lettering of the law, which leaves the door open for, it's so broad, it leaves the door open for things that would be, let's say, otherwise just a conversation that might be less than perfectly affirmative in nature to be considered conversion therapy. Now, something that might impact someone's like sexual behavior, or like, it's like, well, that's what parents and loved ones do. Like, we want to steer our people in the right way. The ironic thing is that like there was a campaign by a local, or like kind of a pride kind of group, and it was what was it? Mask up on the streets and in the sheets, right? And I'm like, okay, well, COVID, mask. Yeah, mask up in the streets. Haha, I get it. Mask up in the sheets. And then there's the picture of a condom, right? And I'm like, well, wait a second. These guys are specifically marketing this to same-sex sexual activity partners, and they're aiming to modify a sexual behavior by saying use a condom. That technically seems to be against conversion therapy because it has to do with addressing same-sex sexual behavior. But it's like this double speak that people can't even see. It's insane. That what I'm worried about is that, and I've had people tell me in no uncertain terms that they desire to inflict punishment against Catholics who uphold Catholic sexual ethic. They've said that they want to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. That was years ago, but now the law is in place, so look out! Look what's coming up soon. Based on the idea that it's a complaint-based law, so that if they perceive that it's conversion therapy, then they can launch a complaint, right? Well, guess what? The Catholic sexual ethic, which is proposed, which many people despise, can be perceived by them as a form of non-affirmative, tacit conversion therapy. It's the same thing like they say, oh, Catholics, you say you love, but you don't love, you're trying to get us to change. And it's just their perception of things is what's going to matter, because that's what's going to launch the court case, right? And so Catholics who are trying to do what is right and good are going to get dragged through this system based on someone else's interpretation because they don't understand the language of the church, or they do understand it and they just simply want to inflict damage, like I've had told to me by several LGBTQ-minded activists, privately, by the way. Yeah. So it's not pretty, okay? But again, we follow a crucified Christ. Do we have the courage to actually follow in his footsteps? I could say, oh yeah, I've got the courage, but I hope I don't chicken out. But I mean, it's a little scary, but it's like, no, just have some faith. There's nothing that should take away our joy. If we know that we're going to be with Jesus in the end, nothing should take away our joy and our peace, even amidst this insanity.
Yeah. Well, Hudson, thank you for your just witness for the church. I mean, I really see you as kind of on the front lines of the frontier of this evangelization on this, in a sense, this continent of individuals who just haven't received the good news of chastity, because the church's teaching on stuff is so often looked as bad news, as hate speech, hate mongering, bigoting, all this. And just your joyful proclamation of like, hey, yeah, there's a cross in the midst of it, but there's joy. the rose grows out of a stem full of thorns. And yeah, the cross is going to be part of the Christian story, but the joy of the resurrection is part of it too. And so just thank you for your witness of that. Yep.
Jason, and here's the thing. Everyone's going to suffer in this world at some point, but we with Christ can suffer with peace. And where else would like that can be the witness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah,
I'll suffer in peace over here. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Well, God bless you just for your witness. And I want to encourage the people watching, if you come to chastity.com, check out the blogs. Hudson's written dozens of them, at least probably about a dozen blogs on the website that you can check out, translated in different languages. We got his videos there. We've already done podcast episodes with him. A lot of awesome content I want to encourage you to check out. And then again, just a big thank to our supporters on Patreon. Again, if you want to support this program, literally any amount is such a gigantic help to our family, to our ministry. And so if this ministry has been a blessing to you, it's a real blessing to us to come alongside of us on Patreon and help us to continue this work. And so Hudson, God bless you. Keep up the tremendous work and be assured of our prayers.
Thanks, Jason. It's been a pleasure to be back. Thank you.
You're welcome. God bless.